Yeah, how are you doing, Senator?
Great, and the school tour that's supposed to show up.
Lead Street?
Yes.
Yes.
And may or may not.
Okay. All right, so I'm looking for my bill that we're going to be listening to today. It's supposed to be 123, but
I think that's the only hearing.
and I don't see it in my folder.
Oh,
One moment, please. I don't have 123 in my folder, but I will open up the hearing on HB 123 and hear from the prime sponsor. No, that's fine. I kind of know what's going on here anyway, but prime sponsor, 123? Yeah, it's not in here. Great. Max, if you could send a message to Marie, I need 123.
I will. I'll send one for you right
All right, thank you. You have the floor, Representative.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Senate Committee. I'm here to introduce House Bill 123. For the record, my name is Representative Arnold Davis from Milan, New Hampshire. I am Vice Chair of the House Resource, Recreation, and Development Committee, and I represent Coos County District 2. House Bill 123 is actually a very simple bill, regardless of what's being pushed by some out-of-state interests. You will probably hear testimony here today that this is a new tax. Remember, timber tax was enacted in 1949. Standing timber was taxed in New Hampshire on a yearly basis, whether you cut the timber or not. House Bill 123 will align carbon sequestration with RSA 79, making all yields equal. Timber tax has been around for 76 years. This is nothing new. This is not a new tax, but a new application of an old tax. You will probably also hear that this is double taxation. Well, if you do a timber harvest, then 40 years later you harvest the same timber lot, you are required to pay the timber tax on both yields. If you do a carbon project, and then 40 years later, if the contract is over, and you decide to enter this property into another carbon deal, under HB 123, you would be required to pay timber tax on both yields, the same as timber harvesting. So why would it be any different if you do a carbon project and then 40 years later, when the contract is over, you decide to do a timber harvest? It is two separate yields. These examples all follow RSA 79 and assess the standing timber at the time of yields only. Carbon sequestration has created new yields, making the value of the standing timber greater. These lots are already in current use, greatly reducing property taxes. So by circumventing paying the timber tax on yields for decades, up to 100 years, and deferring these taxes to the local property owners, in my opinion, this is the only double dipping I see. You may also hear this is unworkable. Well, we have had many meetings with the attorneys at DRA, and they feel this is something they are comfortable with and feel it is workable. So what does HB 123 actually do? House Bill 123 addresses the negative impacts carbon sequestration has on New Hampshire's timber industry and on the heavily timbered municipalities. This bill will modify the existing 76-year-old tax on timber to include the yield of the metric tonnage of carbon sequestration from standing timber. It is vital to New Hampshire's municipalities that revenues from timber tax be preserved and all yields from timber, whether from cutting or sequestration, be accounted for equally when assessed. House Bill 123 is not a new tax. It is not a sales tax. It is not an income tax, despite what some out-of-state interests are pushing. This yield tax on timber has existed since 1949. House Bill 123 ensures that all timber yields are treated the same. This is consistent with the intent of the original law and ensures no yield on timber is unfairly excluded. This bill is constitutionally permitted by an amendment to Part 2, Article 5 of the state constitution, which was ratified in 1942 by over two-thirds of New Hampshire's voters. This bill also came out of the House Committee with a bipartisan 18-0 recommendation of ought to pass and put on the consent calendar. Carbon credits are being sold in the California Cap and Trade Program and others, tying up our forests for multiple decades up to 100 years. The carbon market is growing and will continue to impact our timber and wood products industry in New Hampshire, which happens to be a $1.5 billion a year industry. There are 234 towns and cities in New Hampshire. 211 of them receive timber tax. A loss of timber tax will create a tax burden shift that increases local property taxes. If we continue to incentivize this Carbon First initiative, not only will local property taxes increase due to the loss of timber tax revenues, but the forestry and wood products industries in New Hampshire will continue to decline as wood will no longer be available here, making us dependent on out-of-state timber. This will also be a potential for mismanaged forests, creating issues with recreation, wildlife habitat, forest fire mitigation, and watersheds, ending up with our forests being owned and controlled by out-of-state interests, selling the benefits to California companies, allowing them to continue to pollute. I sincerely ask this committee to support this bill to ensure all timber yields be treated the same, keeping consistent with the intent of the original law. Let's send a strong message to California and out-of-state special interests that our forests and our state are not for sale. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions from the committee? Well done, Representative. Appreciate your efforts, and thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, for the record, my name is David Rocher. I represent Senate District 1, which is all of Coos County, the top third of Grafton County, and almost every unincorporated place that we have in the state of New Hampshire. I probably won't be as eloquent as my colleague from the House, but I'm here to support House Bill 123. And I really am here to really give a little background of how we got here and what's at stake. So as the representative mentioned, 80 years ago, the timber tax was put into play. And the reason it is at the time of that, when towns would assess property values, they would come around and they would assess the standing timber. And that was part of the assessment. Well, what ingenious folks we have in the state of New Hampshire, one way to not pay that is to cut all the trees down. So what we were finding 80 years ago is that prior to the assessment, the trees were stripped. And now we know, as a state who takes great pride in resource management, forestry, and I should note that I represent the city that trees built. We've done an excellent job with conservation and maintaining our forests. And one of those policies that we put in place was the timber tax, that we wouldn't tax your property or your value until that value was yielded through the cutting of timber. So fast forward, put in mind my relatives came to the United States to harvest timber in the exact areas that we're talking about. They did it with railroads and horses. Fast forward to now, there's no railroads and there's no horses doing logging for the most part. So things change, time changes, and we've got at a point now where another industry has developed, this carbon credit industry. And just to again reiterate what the representative said, the carbon credit industry is an opportunity for people in California to fly their jets, to pollute their environment, and they do it by buying carbon credits and paying for that on the backs of our North Country, on the backs of the people who have made a living in the logging industry, trucking industry, sawmill industry, all the industries that make the northern part of our state unique. So this bill is closing a loophole. It closes a loophole that, and I'm not here to disparage anybody from taking it. It works in their favor to do that, but this closes the loophole. So when our towns are losing revenue from timber tax, they're not able to buy a fire truck. They're not able to offset school spending. They're not able to buy a plow truck or buy salt for the winter. So what do? They raise property taxes. I think we've all heard in this body, in this building, the concern that we have with rising property taxes. Passing House Bill 123 would be a way to close a loophole, mitigate rising property taxes, and do what's right for the North Country. So I would urge you to pass House Bill 123.
Thank you, Senator. Questions from the committee? Senator Waters.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Senator. I've heard some concerns from smaller landowners, say under 1,000 acres, about whether this should be applied to them. And what are your thoughts?
I think the bill in front of you is silent on sizes of land. The folks that want to put 500 acres in a carbon program, those really aren't the folks that that are affecting this and causing this disparity. We have a piece of land up north that's 146,000 acres. Other tens of thousands of acres parcels up there. I don't believe that this would affect adversely the smaller landowners.
If I
Follow
may.
up.
I mean, does that mean that, maybe, I guess what I'm trying to weigh off is the people who are smaller landowners who may see this as a way of helping them support their land, but probably in total wouldn't have much effect if they're exempted on the amount of, the workforce, the amount of timber that's cut.
Yeah, and I think that those smaller landowners, I don't think would be affected by this. And if the committee feels like there's some provisions that should be added or could be added, it's your bill now. But I think the underlying principles that are in House Bill 123, closing a loophole, ensuring that our towns are made whole, that's really where we should focus on that.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you have any idea how much money this would raise?
Yeah, so there are people behind me that can break all of that
Okay.
down. Yes, yep, they'll be coming speaking later.
She's on finance.
Yeah.
Any further questions? Seeing none. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Representative McGuire. Yeah, that's fine. Come up here.
Thank you for recognizing me early, Mr. Chairman, but I'm actually not here as a representative. I'm here as the chairman of Granite State Taxpayers. So it may seem a little weird to you that Granite State Taxpayers is in favor of a tax, but we are in favor of House Bill 123, and for both historic and practical reasons. So you heard a little bit about the history of the timber tax. In general, taxes affect behavior. And sometimes that's deliberate, right? Like the tobacco tax, we would like people to smoke less. And so, one of the benefits of the tobacco tax is people do smoke less. But things like the business taxes, those reduce productivity. It discourages business activity, and that's one of the negative consequences of taxes. In this particular case, what the people discovered 80 years ago was that the property tax on timberland was discouraging correct forest management, right? It was an incentive to cut early and to clear cut, right? That's bad for the forests, it's bad for erosion, and so on. And so they went through the trouble of putting into the Constitution the timber tax, which is an alternative to the property tax on timber. And so the timber tax does not discourage cutting. It does a little, right? But it is an alternative to property tax in that it doesn't encourage people to cut at the wrong time. It encourages them to cut at the right time. All right. Part of what they did in 75 years ago was implement RSA 79:5, which I just handed out. All right. So this provision says not only are we going to charge the timber tax when you cut, but if you don't cut, then you're going to be subject to the regular property tax that you used to be subject to. And the whole reason for this, and so now fast forward to today, we have people that don't want to cut, right? The carbon credit people, and so they should be subject to RSA 79:5. But my understanding is that the DRA has said we can't implement RSA 79:5. It's too tough. And so that's the reason for House Bill 123, is to try to say, so for 80 years, we've had a law that says if you don't cut, you still owe tax, right? But now we're finding out we can't implement it. It's too difficult. All right. So that's the historic thing. The point of House Bill 123 is just the alternative to the timber tax for people who don't cut. The second thing is, as I said earlier, taxes change behavior. And if we tax cutting, but we don't tax not cutting, carbon credits, right? That's like encouraging people to carbon credit and discouraging people from cutting, right? We don't want to discourage productivity in New Hampshire, right? We want to encourage business and we want to encourage productivity. We don't want to discourage sawmills and logging and forest products and cordwood and all the other uses of the forest, right? But if we allow people, if we tax one thing and not the other, that's in effect what we're doing. We're putting our thumb on the scale of carbon credits in favor, against use of the forest, right? So this bill balances that scale. And if, I'm not going to talk about the details of the bill, but if the bill were to say, be a heavier tax on not cutting than the regular timber tax is on cutting, from my point of view, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because cutting has all the other ancillary, advantages of productivity in the state. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Representative. So DRA said this can't be taxed. This is unworkable.
I heard. Thank you for the question. I heard that from the sponsor. So it's a little bit secondhand, right? That they tried to go the 79:5 route, and it didn't work for them. And you can sort of see why, right? Because it's probably not super easy to evaluate how much is a forest worth, right? And from year to year, figuring out, well, it grew another inch, and therefore, that it's kind of impractical. It's probably very expensive to have an accurate, Whereas when you cut a tree, you can measure it at so many tons, and it's so long, and all this sort of stuff, and you can say, okay, this is the tax, right? So,
is there any historical where they have actually tried to do this and were successful? Or?
Yeah, I'm not the best person to answer that question, but maybe others can.
All right, thank you, Representative. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Honorable Mr. Thurberge. Did I say that right?
You never do, sorry.
Yeah. Mr. T, welcome.
Okay, if I can indulge, can I have Commissioner Gorman testify with
Absolutely.
me? That way we'll save the committee time. Okay, I appreciate that. Mr.
Welcome,
Chairman.
Commissioner.
Get two commissioners at once, make it quicker.
All right.
Hopefully it helps everybody. Good morning. My name is Raymond Gorman. I represent District 3, which is from Pittsburgh to Twin Mountain.
okay? To say I cover several miles. And one of the other important parts of it that I'll talk to you about today is the unincorporated places. I have 20 of the unincorporated places. And the carbon credit things, I really just became aware of it about 2.5 years ago when I was on the Connecticut Headwaters Board. I represent the county on that board. And I was just shocked that they had been selling these carbon credits for years. We didn't know about it, et cetera. So what I want to basically say is that it's a local, the timber tax is a local tax, that it, especially in Coos County, is very important to us. And I'm going to use the unincorporated places as the example. So about 3 months ago, Town of Gorham comes to us, and they're running a dispatch center that includes all the Mount Washington areas, and that has, I think, 6 of our unincorporated towns. They had a cost overrun. They needed another $20,000. We contributed that $20,000 to help them finish that project. The original project, the unincorporated towns contributed $60,000. So this money from these unincorporated towns is in these treasuries. A significant amount of it comes from the timber tax. So that's my point here. And we've done the same thing with Northern Borders Dispatch, where we've supported our ambulance and dispatching services through grants, basically. And, you know, this monies that are coming from the taxes from the wood is very important. And like the town of Pittsburgh, I mean, you know, they've lost significant revenue with less cutting because of from what has been shown so far is that with this carbon first credit forestry, you're not going to have as much cutting. You're very seldom, I believe, you'll ever see a clear cut, a wildlife opening, because they're looking for the trees that have a big mast, all right? That's going to affect your wildlife, folks. That's going to change how some of the things. The roads that they build to get to the forest, to do the cutting and stuff, these are roads that are used by OHRVs, snowmobiles, and they're very important to the headwaters as well. So it's a two-pronged thing here. It's many angles here that I'm talking about, that this timber tax is needed, as well as we need the forest to keep going on. There's going to be a lot of people that are going to tell you about what jobs are involved. There's a lot of people coming after me that's going to explain it even better than what I'm explaining. But for the whole county, it's important that we do not lose timber tax, that this is a local tax, folks. Think about this. This affects Pittsburgh, unincorporated towns. These are the people that are affected with these monies, all right? If these monies disappear, it's another, you know, it's another difficult thing. I mean, the town of Pittsburgh, I think their cost per student is over $40,000 per student. You know, it's unique, the area that we have, and it also affects our economy. I burn wood. I've always burned wood all my life. My father used to have horses and cut wood. And a little quick example is that the gal showed up about 3 weeks ago with the wood, and I asked her where her husband is, and she says, well, we've been having troubles buying firewood, buying the hardwood, so we're buying it with our own lots now, and he's doing the cutting in the woods, and I'm doing the processing of the wood and delivering. You know, it affects people when not as much wood is being cut. And it definitely affects the North Country, you know, and this lady, her husband comes from a family of 21 kids, all right, his father came from, and they always had horses and lumbering, and there's down to a couple of them left in the family that are still doing the forest work, and we need to keep those families and those people going, and I'll talk about, that's a northern area, and I'll let Robert talk about his region and his areas, so.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, for the record, County Commissioner Robert Tibels, representing District 1, Berlin and Milan. I'm in favor of this bill for a number of reasons, but there are a lot of facts that will be presented to you, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, but more importantly is that because of the situation in Pittsburgh with this, the situation we have with the unincorporated places, Milan Lumber, for example, had to close down 5 weeks last year because they couldn't get the timber from the 146,000 acres of, of land that was held kind of in hostage. And also, that had an impact this year, and currently they're only operating 4 days a week because of the lack of ability to get the timber that they need to operate full-time. In Berlin, first of all, I mean, Coos County is highly dependent on the timber industry. In Berlin, we're currently working to negotiate the opening of the biomass once again, so that seems to be going extremely well. I can go on, and I can repeat some of the things that Commissioner Gorman has said, but in order to save time for the committee, there are other people behind me that will be presenting you more additional facts, which I believe are in favor of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Is there any selective cutting for the health of the forest in the 100,000 acres being done at all?
I'm not, go ahead, Ray.
We're going to have a forester speaking soon here that will tell you what's going on there. But I believe there is still some, yes, okay? But if they're going to meet, from what I understand, their quotas and so on and so forth, they're going to need to keep a certain amount of mast, all right? And then if you start cutting too much, so on and so forth. So that type of forestry that is very much the norm here in the state now for decades, it's not necessarily the norm for carbon credits, okay? And with our folks in the North Country, it's difficult for us to understand how this groups are coming in and buying this forest, and it seems like the people that are really getting the most benefit out of this is the folks in California. You know, this money's, it's not New Hampshire money.
So, as the song says, how long has this been going on? Meaning, why is this all of a sudden coming to a head now? Has this been going on for a while?
So I believe, and we'll have this, people be giving statistics. It's been 8 years. There's been a steady trend downward, and there's people that are going to give you better statistics than me just saying, it's been going down, it's fluctuated. There'll be people that give you better numbers than I will.
Thank you. Senator Waters.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Commissioners. I had a call from a landowner up north, and just running a scenario by me. He had a neighbor who, had bought a couple of thousand acres, and of course the first thing that went up was a no hunting and no trespassing signs on the land. And the worry was that if this was passed, would the investors in California go to other states to offer the tax credits, and that might put pressure on some of the landowners up north to sell out to developers or out-of-staters who might post their land like that. And I had something I hadn't thought about, but
The good thing with being on the board for the Headwaters is that the easements are there. There's public money in that lands, all right?
Yeah.
Several $1 million was done 20 years ago. It's, if you ever have a minute, take a look at the way the easements and everything's written. It's set up very well for change, okay? So that if we do need to move things, but at least with that property, as an example, they can't put no trespassing signs on there.
Yeah. No.
I could see, let's
I
say.
meant about see if I was really more, maybe I said the others, but this is more about somebody who owns 2,000-3,000 acres, a private landowner,
Yep.
who, if they can't get the income from the stream because the tax credits aren't being offered up here because of the tax, might sell out.
It could be, sir. I can't, it's hard for me to speak to that because I'd be just, yep.
I mean, just this, I got a call, and so I thought I'd ask.
Senator Rosenwald?
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for taking my question. So I heard two strains of your testimony. One was this is a way of getting more money to Coos County towns. And the second one was this would encourage more cutting of trees. Which is it?
I guess I'm going to say it's more or less in between. I think we want to keep it going as it is. We don't want to see it become lower, okay? I think the forest management plans that I've seen in our county are very good, all right? I mean, I personally had 50 acres and took mine with, I did it with the Rough Grouse Society, all right? So there's a lot of this going on with people, some are managing for wildlife, some are managing for veneer, there's different things like that. But I think to say that we're going to see an increase in the tax, I really doubt that. I think we just want to make sure the towns are protected to get what they have been getting and that it stays continuous.
Yeah.
So you don't think that closing this loophole would increase the revenues to the local towns?
It sure would be nice if it did. In today's world, we'll see. I mean, I don't believe I don't want to look at you and say, oh yeah, we're going to get a lot of revenues, it's going to be a big help. We just don't want to lose what we have. All right, I think that's our whole thought process here, and what supposed us for the folks like us today that are testifying is to keep what we have. Have our forests managed is what we want to see. Managed in a way that it's every 10 to 20 years or whatever year plan they have, that they keep that plan going, that we don't have 100 years of no cutting, trees falling down, so on and so forth. That's what we don't want to see. We want to make sure that it stays normal, is what I'm saying.
Thank you.
Yeah, Senator Rosenwald, it depends on the owner on what, they decide to do with the land that they have, invested in. So one way or the other, this does not force them to undergo carbon credits or things like that. If they want to put their property into carbon credits, that's fine. But it's an individual choice. Also, to Senator Avertt's question about how long this has been going on for a little bit over 8 years, and it deals with companies out of California. The reason that this bill is before you is because of the situation that occurred in Pittsburgh up north with with a number of issues with the lack of harvesting timber, the closing of, and then we made progress with having people use the land for recreational purposes and whatnot. But what this bill does, and what they fear in California, is that it sets a precedence nationwide. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Seeing no further questions, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Mark Brady? Co-op Administrator? Okay. Do you like me? Is those on? I like you too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark Brady.
Your mic is off.
There we go. There we go. Thank you. Mark Brady, Cause County Administrator. I'll try to be as brief as I can. You have a lot going on here. Just to follow up on some of this past discussion, to flush it out a little bit more. Look, we have always been, as a county, agnostic about carbon credits and carbon sequestration. We're very agnostic about it, and I've always said that, okay? And our commissioners have said that. The issue is, and I think Granite State taxpayers is absolutely correct, that, taxation is incentivization. And if you don't close the loophole, you're incentivizing carbon sequestration, carbon harvesting versus timber tax. We've seen a decrease in timber tax, no question about it. Industries change. I got my degree in economics from UNH. I get it, okay? I get Schumpeter's, creative destruction and everything else, and you can't keep everything the same. But with that said, this is a huge incentivization. I would argue it's a 10% at a minimum incentivization to sequester carbon. That has a direct impact on us, a direct impact on our budgets, on the county budget specifically, because we have 23 of the 25 unincorporated places in the state. But then secondly, on the rest of our tax base, because one of Pittsburgh, one of Clarksville, one of West Stewartstown isn't getting that revenue, that affects them to obviously pay their part of the county tax. We operate 2 nursing homes, and I think I've said this before, Tim, I'm going to get into it again. We have a $50 million budget, 2 nursing homes, sheriff's department, corrections facility, et cetera. It has a direct impact on us. We want to protect our tax base. We are agnostic about carbon. We have not gone down the road to carbon. I will leave for the record, though. I'll leave you California's scoping plan, their most recent scoping plan, which is the CARB. It's California Air and Resource Board. You can see it right here, and I'm just going to leave it for the record. That's partly, make no mistake about it, at the bigger level, at the macro, at the policy level, that's relevant to New Hampshire. That is relevant. I think to go to the senator's question about, are we looking to, quote, make money off of carbon? Our premise is it's real simple. You're a property owner, private property, do what you want with your property within the law, but pay your fair share. Pay your fair share. And don't live off of the taxpayers of Coos, and it's not just Coos. There's 200 communities in this state that get some form of timber tax. And it's like, just pay your fair share, that's all. This state is a precedent, 75 years and going. We have decided as a state collectively to manage that resource the way we want to manage that resource. And that's articulated in that timber tax and the yield tax. Again, why is carbon so different? Why should they get a tax break? Do what you want with your property, but pay your fair share. That's what we're saying. And I'll leave you with this last point. We've been down here now for the last couple of sessions for sure. It's interesting that I think that Representative Davis started this last session, last year, with a moratorium bill, which became the registry bill. So the moratorium bill, which we started this whole discussion, was that bill that became the registry. We're grateful for what the legislature collectively has done so far. We're imploring the legislature to please, we would like this bill passed, but the state has to address the carbon issue and the management of its forests. And I think all of us in this room can say that the state really isn't totally prepared to do that. The state doesn't know all the implications, doesn't know the implications of what this type of forest management does, okay, to wildlife, to it, fish and game. Fish and Game articulated when the first stewardship plan, Aurora's first stewardship plan, was rejected by the state a year ago, and that's ongoing now. So we've been over a year now waiting for a stewardship plan to get in place. All right, Fish and Game wrote a very good analysis of what the implications of that stewardship plan that Aurora wanted to do. And to go to the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters property real quick, the county's probably done the most extensive analysis of that conservation easement, certainly that I know of. Maybe the state has, I don't know if the AG's office has or whatever. We have. It's on our website, okay? We submitted it October 4th. Our attorneys did a deep dive into that conservation easement. And the bottom line on that property is the last time that property had any real estate transfer tax was in 2003. Okay, from then on, with all the different iterations of the ownership, it's been at the top level with the different operating companies. Okay, they changed the ownership up there. So, because I spent over an hour in the Registry of Deeds about 2 weeks ago looking at that to see what's going on with the property. So, in 2003, when you get the sale that kind of sets up the next 22 years, we were at about 40,000 for about the first 10 years. Then you go into about 2010, 2012, and you go down to about 30,000. And then when you have Blue Source come in with that ownership, you have it was registered with CARB, California Air and Resource Board, in 2013. And you then go from 40 to 30, 30 to 20 in our most recent analysis. And maybe Aurora can, David Cuzzy's here, maybe he can tell us what they're doing. We're trying to figure out what they're doing, but it looks as though they're well under 20,000, at least for the last year. We're not saying they're not cutting. We're saying they're not cutting nearly as much. So that all impacts us. This is ongoing. I just implore you to please, listen to what we're saying. We need help on this. We really do, and the state needs to address it.
Okay, and I appreciate that, and we're not going to call out names in here, by the way.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
This is for
Questions from the
the
committee? Seeing none, thank you very much. Yeah. I gotta move this along. I'll talk to you in a little bit.
I think if Councilor Kenny's here, he's got other appointments.
He is, there he is. I didn't see you, Counselor, I would've called you up. Sorry about that. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Good to be back in the Senate spaces. It's been a long time.
You're welcome to come back if you like. Not right away.
It's not right away. Mr. McConkey is worrying there. Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Avard, and members of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee. My name is Joe Kenny. I live in Wakefield, New Hampshire, and I've lived there for 60 years with my wife and 2 children. I grew up on a 100-acre farm in Wakefield. My immediate family owns close to 1,000 acres in New Hampshire, and I've been the District 1 Executive Counselor for 10 years. I've served both the New Hampshire House and the State Senate. My district covers from northern New Hampshire, the Lakes region, and the upper Seacoast, from Durham to Pittsburgh. Today, I ask for your support on House Bill 123, a yield tax on property enrolled or registered for the purpose of generating carbon offset credits. Contracts that sequester carbon for revenues would be required to provide an annual carbon total tonnage report after signing up on the registry, and local assessing officials would assess 10% of carbon yield tax, in which the local tax collector would send out a bill and collect the yield tax. I would like to steal a line from the New Hampshire Taxpayers Association, who are in support of this bill. This is not a new tax, but is a new application of an old tax. This returns to taxing timber that used to be taxed when harvested, but is now taken off the harvest in taxation and converted to a new income stream due to the carbon offset credits. As the committee knows, the timber tax has been around for over 75 years, and it was put in place to preserve land, promote conservation, and create revenue for the local communities. This bill would do the same. The controversy surrounding the Connecticut Lakes Headwater Forest Agreement between the state and the owner has been brought to light. The impact of the lands that were tied up in the carbon offset program. In this case, the usual 40,000 cords a year has been drastically reduced, and therefore impacted northern wood industry. It also has been a threat to local New Hampshire revenues, in which the small town communities like Pittsburgh, Clarksville, and Stewartstown, who rely heavily on timber tax revenue to help balance their budgets. Unbeknownst to the many in the state, the carbon offset program has been the biggest existential threat to the timber industry in our history, and to the health of our forest as well. We as a state have always supported sustainable forestry. It's good to harvest the forest, support new wildlife, and to prevent forest fires along the way as a result of cleaning up the base of our forest. In my judgment, the carbon credit industry is an unchecked industry here in New Hampshire, and for several years it has gone unnoticed. But we as a state are catching up. House Bill 1697, sponsored by Representative Davis, called for 2 things. 1, the development of a public registry for all forested lands enrolled in the carbon offset program. 2, for DRA to conduct a study of the issues related to lost timber tax revenues as a result of forest lands located in New Hampshire being enrolled in the carbon credit offset programs. The creation of the registry was a tremendous step forward. It was one of my first recommendations out of my testimony back in January of 2024 before the House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. At that time, why should I know as a taxpayer who is involved in the current use program, or who timbers their lands and has to pay a tax bill of 10%, but not know who was involved in a carbon program that impacted the local forest and local revenues? Up until last year, we didn't know who was participating in carbon offset programs in our state. The presence of a registry lists today 9 properties with about 186,000 acres tied up in a carbon program. In Maine, the lands total about 750,000 acres. Both states are the most forested states in the country per capita. It's no mistake there are dozens of carbon websites promoting the program and that are directed at the northeastern states. If Maine goes in the direction that they're going now, where just 5% of their land is involved in carbon offset programs, the demand to harvest is going to go elsewhere. New Hampshire, Vermont, but I would argue it's going to go outside of New England. It's going to be a national issue where our truckers who are going to truck logs will have to go out of New England to get their logs, which would basically, destroy our logging industry here in New Hampshire and in the Northeast. The second part of the House Bill 1670, 1697 is why we're here today. The study brought forward the understanding of the loss of revenues and impact of local communities by landowners using a carbon offset program. This report can be found online under the Department of Revenue. House Bill 123 is another step of legislation that's needed to create a balance for the landowner, the local communities, and the state to promote revenues for the local communities and further encourage sustainable forestry. Although I personally am a skeptic of the carbon program as a rule, I do believe landowners have the right to do what they want with their lands, but the state also has a responsibility to make sure that our logging industry is not destroyed by this carbon offset program and disincentivizes it by creating a balanced approach through the appropriate measures of legislation. House Bill 1697 is one of those pieces of legislation that helped create some balance, but I suspect there is more legislation to come. And I just wanted to add, before Governor and Council these days, we're receiving a lot of contracts with regards to land easement programs that federal government programs are paying for. And a lot of times they put in the provision that there has to be an option for a carbon program. And that to me is a little bit dangerous. I think local control, our states can dictate whether we should have the carbon offset program or not, but it's a carrot and a stick when it comes to a lot of these contracts. We're going to be confronted with a contract from Milan, New Hampshire that involves some federal funding that has inserted that carbon offset program language in it. That's something that our governor and the state really needs to look at. I don't believe that this needs to be studied any longer. I don't believe there needs to be a moratorium. I believe we as a state need to act now. There'll be subsequent legislations that will be brought forward to address all kinds of things. When I gave my testimony back in January of last year, my first recommendation was a registry. My second recommendation was which department would oversee this carbon offset program. My third recommendation was we should have a discussion about our public lands here in New Hampshire, whether it's local, state, should they be involved in carbon offset programs? Should land trusts who use public monies be excluded from using carbon offset programs? That was another point I made. New Hampshire sovereignty is in jeopardy to outside companies dictating terms of our forest industry. That's another point that I think we should look at. Should New Hampshire companies be the only ones allowed to participate in this program? That was another point that I wanted to bring out. And then also the idea of, our commercial industry, such as the ski industry and whatnot, what's their involvement in the carbon offset programs? And lastly, should we have limited contractual arrangements? Why do you need a 1,000-year contract? I'm being facetious. It's a 100-year contract for a carbon offset program. Should it be 20? Should it be 40? To me, it seems a little ridiculous that you would put a carbon offset program contract for 100 years when we have fire, we have disease infestation, when we have ice storms, and what's that going to do to the value of the property over a 100-year period? So this is an open discussion well beyond House Bill 123, but I think it all is interconnected, and so that's why I give some of that information out. But I think it's an important step to pass House Bill 123. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor. Questions? I have one, and it's just gnawing in the back of my head. And with regards to the bioplants, did that have any influence on what's going on here with the timber and industry?
Thank you for that question. About a week ago, I visited Pine Tree Biomass Facility up in Tamworth. They have enough small chips to run their plant, but the further north you get, Whitefield and Bethlehem, they don't have enough chips. They got to go elsewhere. They got to pay more. And quite frankly, they're looking for local vendors, if you will, that will provide wood chips to those power plants. So it has a tremendous impact on the low energy power plants in New Hampshire. They have got to have access to our woodlands and to our forest chips in order for them to survive.
Thank you, Councilor.
Thank you.
No further questions.
Thank you.
I'm very interested in hearing what Jennifer Ramsey has to say, even though you haven't supported or opposed. Are you in here? DRA? Jennifer? Somebody find Jennifer. No, she's not here, really? She wanted to speak. All right, well, it says DRA. All right. She is? Oh. Well, into the principal's office. Now you go.
Excellent.
Welcome.
Thank you. For the rec-
There was before your testimony, there was a mention that it can't, I think, 79.5 general tax credits in certain cases was not workable. If you could touch on that as well. Kind of interesting. We have a law that we can't enforce.
I will speak to that. For the record, Jennifer Ramsey, Tax Policy Counsel with the Department of Revenue Administration, and with me is...
I'm Adam Donancourt. I'm the Assistant Director of the Municipal and Property Division at DRA.
Thank you.
Thank you. So starting with 79.5, that statute would ostensibly allow for the local property assessors to assess a tax against carbon credit offset landowners, but it has not ever been utilized that we know of, because we believe the language in it is not susceptible of interpretation. So I think a previous speaker mentioned the report that we issued that's available on our website. In it, we have a legislative recommendation that statute be looked at, because there's language in it that says a town or city must be unreasonably deprived of revenue in order to claim the tax. We don't know how we would advise the local tax assessors how to interpret that language. Similarly, the tax applies when trees have arrived at the degree of maturity most suitable for their use. That's another area that the legislature could clarify. And lastly, the statute says that the tax shall be taxed in the same manner as general property. And that, of course, goes back to the fact that the statute was enacted at a time when all there was a general property tax. Now we have a whole current use system overlay with respect to that, and so this anticipates a property tax at the general property tax level. So we think that the legislature would want to give some consideration to how this would interplay with the current use system that we have now, if the goal is to make 79.5 more clear and make it the vehicle to tax timber as a part of the yield tax. Alternatively, looking at the existing bill, we find the existing bill is not something that we believe we would be able to implement, and we prepared a fiscal note quick guide which we hand around from time to time when we have technical concerns about a bill, and Adam is distributing that to you right now. It outlines the concerns we have with the language of the existing bill.
I'm listening.
Yeah, focusing specifically on lines 17 through 20 of the first page of the bill is passed by the House, which is kind of the core provision where the yield tax would then also apply to carbon credits. There's 4 areas in that language that we don't know how we would implement. The first is that a property has to have been enrolled or registered in what? The local registry or the California Air Resources Board registry or some other registry. And then the question is, how would the local assessors know that that had occurred? And then second is the definition of carbon offset credits, which we found difficult to understand because it talks in terms of quantities of gas and tonnage, whereas it doesn't seem to speak to what we understand to be the credit itself, which is a certificated tradable credit that's utilized to conduct business through the California Air Resources Board and other registries. Focusing on the issued and sold language in that paragraph, those are 2 different events. Credits are sometimes issued, as we understand it, and then sold many years later. So we would need to know what is the taxable event that triggers the responsibility to pay the tax. And then the language before that is that the tax is on the estimated net value of the tax. And this bill doesn't give any guidance as to who would do those estimates, what would be netted out in terms of cost, and how one would do some kind of valuation of a credit. If it's a credit that's been sold, perhaps the valuation is the price at which it was sold. But if it's a credit that's been issued, how do you value an issued credit? So those are the technical challenges that we would have with advising the local assessors right now on how to implement this bill. And there's more detail in the quick guide, but I think that gives you a good high-level summary. Anticipating Senator Rosenwald's question, how much is this
sure
tax
she's gonna
going
have
to
one.
raise? We don't know, because we don't currently have any source of information as to how many credits are being registered and being sold. But we do believe it would raise some local property tax revenue for people. We just can't quantify it right now.
Were these concerns brought up in the House?
There was a different version of the bill in the House, so we commented on a different version of the bill in the House. The concerns that we've raised here, we've also been meeting with the sponsors of the legislation and trying to work on a draft amendment that we believe would address all of these concerns and would make the bill implementable. And we appreciate the sponsors' willingness to consult with us and get to a place where we think that something would work. For the record, we don't take any position on whether or not this body should tax these credits, but to the extent that you desire to do so, we would very much appreciate having something that we could work with the local towns to implement.
Do you have anything to add?
Do not.
I did give you a copy of a potential. I don't know if that alleviates some of your concerns, but you can peruse that and come back at it a little bit later and talk about it if that helps.
I appreciate that. I would like just a minute to
Yeah,
look at
absolutely.
it, and we'll stick around and
All right, thank
if
you.
you have questions. Thank you.
Jason Stock. Jason?
I am here.
You didn't hear me?
I said, I am here.
Oh, okay. Is it hot in here still? No? Warm? Okay.
We do represent paper mills. Oh, wait. Beautiful. Well, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm Jason Stock, the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Timberland Owners Association. And we represent timberland owners, the state's forest products industry, founded in 1911 by Brown Company up in Berlin. And so our roots are timbers and trees. We represent loggers, sawmills, foresters, biomass power plants. And our members own or manage over 1 million acres of timberland and in the state of New Hampshire. And so we have a very keen interest in this bill. I'm coming today to speak in opposition to it. And with my testimony, I'm including, as you saw, several documents. 2 are letters from NHTOA members who couldn't be here today. One is Steve Wood, an apple grower and timberland owner from the Upper Valley. The other is Tom Thompson, a timberland owner from Orford, New Hampshire. And these letters do a good job at touching on some of the fundamental concerns we have with this piece of legislation. We do believe it is a new tax. Call it what you will, different application of an old tax, but it's a tax that's not being assessed today. And so we look at it and say, you know, in the most simple of terms, it is in fact a new tax. And the other piece is that we also believe it is a double tax, particularly in the case of timber that's where you have a tree that's growing, you enter it into a forest carbon program, that same tree is harvested, that tree is essentially being taxed twice. And we also believe this is because this piece of legislation is taxing the net value of a contract, it's not taxing cords, it's not taxing board feet, it's taxing the net value of a contract. We view it as more or less an income tax or sales tax. And why that's important is for landowners, how you're taxed and how that tax is categorized does have an impact on how you manage your books, whether it's a capital asset versus an operating cost, et cetera. And as you just heard, the other piece is it's a big unknown in terms of revenue. We don't know, and you just heard from DRA, even they don't know what the tax impact is this would have on New Hampshire's timberland owners. We believe this bill is ripe for a study commission. I think we're looking at right now version 4.0, and it sounds like there may be a version 5.0 in the wings, which tells me this is not quite ready for prime time. I'll use the comment that's frequently heard. This bill, this issue is ripe for a study commission. My letter of testimony gets into some of the mechanical problems that you just heard from DRA. We share those as well. What is a net? How do you net out your cost to determine what is actually being taxed, when it's applied? And then the other piece is the all other provisions of RSA 79 apply. Well, there's a lot of other stuff in RSA 79, such as 79.5, that apply to this new commodity, that's new tax that's occurring. Again, we believe it is ripe for a study commission. We also believe that, fundamentally, that the ability for a landowner to sell forest carbon is a fundamental property right. These are private legal contracts that are entered into between a timberland owner and a carbon developer or entity that's purchasing that value of that tree is that carbon. And so we believe it's a fundamental property right. One of the other items that I provided was a kind of a position policy statement that the New Hampshire timberland owners developed back in December 2023, we saw the issue of carbon sales and carbon contracts on the horizon. We got our head together as an association and said, look, we need to understand this, we need to learn about it, and we need to kind of create some principles here that can put some side rails down that we can use to evaluate things such as House Bill 123. When I look at 123, I come back, to some of the mechanical issues, and one of the most, probably the most salient is the very last principle, is that we can't support a policy proposal that's unenforceable. You just, why go through all this for a paper tiger to say we've done something? We believe this needs more work. We believe it needs more study. We're happy to participate in that process. We have said this all along that we're willing to. These are complicated contracts. This is not a, quote, simple bill. This is we're taxing carbon. And as we heard from DRA, is it a gas? Is it a ton? Is it a credit? There are some things that really need to be nailed down in order for this House Bill 123 to be implemented. We are not adverse. I'll sit here right here today and say we're not adverse to applying a tax to these transactions. We have looked at that, but this is not the way to do that. I have heard that from landowner members to say, look, all right, if there's a pain or suffering at the local level because of this, sure, let's have a conversation. Let's try to iron this out and figure out a way to do that. It's kind of the New Hampshire way of doing business. Jamming a policy proposal that's unworkable through just to say you've done something is not appropriate. And we have an example, and I have a landowner or a forester that'll speak to this, but in the mid-'70s, there was an attempt to implement RSA 79.5 in the town of Orange. They sent a tax bill to a landowner and said, hey, I think it was spruce fir, that spruce fir is looking pretty mature. We think you should be paying it. And this landowner did what we do in New Hampshire. They said, all right, let's sit down and have a conversation. Let's map out a harvest plan, and you get your revenue, we can manage the timber, and let's work this out. And so it's for that reason that I think, a study commission where we can get around the table and not be working on a bill that is now version 4.0, sounds like maybe soon to be 5.0, working on this kind of shifting landscape that we're working on. The other piece that I want to point out, and this is the fourth and final piece of your packet, is I had met with Senator Pearl earlier this month, last month actually, and he said, are there any principles or while this, if there were a study commission, what assurances can your landowners, is there a concern that your landowners will all say, oh boy, let's rush into a carbon contract before anything happens? And so we had, and this is in your packet, we had come up with a list of principles that we thought as landowners we could agree to go above and beyond the call of legal requirements, but they foster that conversation, like the conversation that happened in the town of Orange back in the 70s, so that during this, while we hammer out and thrash around this issue, there's an assurance that people aren't going to be sneaking carbon contracts through while this study commission is working. Obviously, I cannot speak to every single landowner in the state, but I did get a commitment from 330,000 acres worth of land ownership to say, yeah, this is something that we feel is reasonable and that we could abide by. So I'll conclude my testimony at that point. Again, I am advocating that we do a study commission and we work so that we can work this through and kind of handle it in the New Hampshire fashion. The last item I did want to speak to, impacts on the industry. The state's forest products industry is right now in a pretty rough spot. There's no sugarcoating it. The single biggest issue we're seeing today is trade and tariff issues. You talk to hardwood sawmill owners in particular, some of the trade and tariff issues that are occurring right now, and also some of the softwood with lumber and logs and rough cut lumber coming and going across the Canadian border. This is in some instances, this issue has turned our industry, particularly the hardwood world, on its head. And we have hardwood, I was with a hardwood sawmill last week who had $600,000 worth of hardwood lumber in a can in the Pacific Ocean heading to Asia, saying, I'm not sure what the price is going to be when it lands there. And quite honestly, I'm not sure which port to send it to. Do I send it to China, where I was planning to, or do I send this to another potential buyer in Vietnam? And so this is the dynamic that we as an industry, the other piece is workforce. Just like every other manufacturing sector in the country, our workforce is getting older, although we're doing things to try and bring that up. But you talk to mills, they'll tell you markets, workforce are issues 1 and 2. But having said this, I would be, certainly if there is a study commission and we're going to be looking at timber taxes, which is a reflection of wood being harvested on the landscape, that to me is a reasonable way to also look at and answer the question about what's going on in the forest industry or how that's affecting it. And so I wanted to get that out there. I didn't want people to walk away today thinking that, this is an issue we're watching, mills are watching it. There's a general concern, but I can tell you for certain the issue of the day right now is trade, tariff, markets, workforce. And, that's stuff we're having to work through, and we've been around as an industry for several hundred years. We plan to be around several hundred more, but it's right now there is some tough sledding. I'll conclude my comments.
Questions, Senator Pearl and Senator McConkey?
Well, Jason, thank you. You and I have had many conversations on this topic, as well as I have with many of the stakeholders in this room. And I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate your willingness and cooperation to, and the members of your group to look at this and work on it. We understand it's an important issue. I have drafted an amendment that is going to look at making a study commission, and I certainly, you've seen most of the language, I believe, as I've gone along working with it. And, I understand that you have some hesitations with some of the things we're doing. I understand, I respect that. I know folks on the other side of the issue do as well, but I think, the amendment that I'm going to put forward to the committee after we're done with the hearing will hopefully give everyone a chance to have a voice in this important process, and will give you a seat at the table, as you rightfully deserve. The timber industry is extremely important to New Hampshire. This committee recognizes that. I certainly do. I've participated in it most of my life. And so I want you to take a look at that. And again, I know you're not going to love it. I respect that. No one else did either. But I guess that's sort of where, you're in the middle, right?
It's the Jeb Bradley approach to legislating.
It kind of is.
The moratorium piece, if that is in fact there, and I will look at it, and thank you. Yeah, that is a piece that gives us a lot of heartburn. I will tell you, that gives us a lot of heartburn. And we've had this conversation, it's a property right. We think there in fact might be some constitutional issues around it, albeit it's a two-year deal. Does someone muster the gumption to fight it? Who knows in 2 years? But the moratorium does give some of our members pause. But I appreciate all the work that you have done and all the arrows you have taken. And thank you. Yeah, there's a few more back there. There's still some space. But thank you. And I'll take a look at it, and I'll review it with my team, and we'll get back to you. So.
If I might add one more point, just when in your review, I've taken a creative approach to this moratorium, which I realize your membership doesn't like, but
but I've tied it to the length of the commission. So if the commission decides to work very quickly on this and puts a review, a final finding out in 6 months, 8 months, a year, year and a half, the moratorium ends with that final report. So the opportunity is there to have a shorter moratorium if all of the stakeholders decide to sit down and really act diligently on this. So just want you to understand that as
Okay.
Senator McConkey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Stock, for taking my question. How many, if you're at liberty to say, how many of your members participate in this program now?
Forest carbon contracts? I think at the moment we have we have three actively participating in it. Looking at the registry that's on DNCR's website, we have 3 members.
And roughly how many members do you have in your organization?
So our organization represents almost 1,000 members. I'd say half of which characterize themselves as landowners. The other half are businesses. Although I may call myself a logger or a forester, I may also own, 1,000 acres of land. And again, for us, it's not a question of acreage as a kind of a fundamental property. We look at property rights. That is kind of a third rail for us.
Thank you. If I could follow up. Thank you. Of those 3 landowners that you're referring to, are they receiving regular checks every year? Have they received those checks regularly over the last 5 years?
You're going to hear from them today. They're here today. I'll let them confirm, but it's my understanding that one has received the Aurora program project that we've heard about, the Connecticut Lakes project. One has not, although they have registered, they have gone through the work up front, and then I think the third may have just received it. The process, and you'll hear about this, it's a multi-year process to get registered. There's a ton of inventory work and a lot of work that goes into getting this. So, but as I know now, one has not, and I think one just started.
One last. So, being a member of your organization, having one of the smallest lots out there, 80 acres, I thought being a good steward was cutting my timber on a plan and in a regular time, evaluating what my forest was, and I enjoy having a managed property that I walk through, participate, people hunt on, where I don't have slash and everything else everywhere. And I think I'm a good steward, and also I'm a good landowner to have next door to housing and everything else, because wildfire is not a endangerment on my property. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Waters?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I also had a question about the amendment that's before you. You'll see the section 2 there, which adds the notwithstanding RSA 79A as a change to 79.5. So you see what I'm talking about?
Page 1, line 17.
Yeah. So what you see here is essentially an attempt to make it possible for 79.5 to be enforced. What do you think about that?
I think what we heard today is 79.5 is, as it sets today, is unenforceable, is what I heard Department of Revenue say. I think for us, 79.5, there needs to be some sideboards on it. If you have a beautiful stand of white pine, and you love those trees, they're nice, big, healthy trees, you're growing them. What we want to avoid is a situation where it becomes down to the discretion of a selectman or assessor in town to walk out back and say, you know, that Waters Tree Farm, why isn't he cutting that pine? I think he should be, you know, and then it becomes a judgment call. Well, I want to grow big trees. That to me is what I want to do. That's part of my management plan. And for a town to come in and say, well, you should be cutting those, or we're going to start to assess a tax. That's not to say that at some point you pass that parcel down to your son who says, you know what, I'm going to harvest that because I have a different philosophy, I have a different management version. I want to attract more wildlife back there. And so 79.5 is fraught with interpretation. It's really, so long answer to your short question. If we were going to really start looking at the enforcement of RSA 79.5, I think we would have to put some very strong side guardrails on it. Because if I grow a white birch that's this large, an assessor could say, well, that's a reasonable piece of pulpwood or firewood. I say, well, I think it's merchantable when it gets to this size, and at that point, I want a saw log. Well, who's judging? You know, you could see the conflict. And so I think 79.5, if the attempt is to try and make that workable, we need to really put some sidebars on it. And again, that would be a discussion with the municipalities and some forestry professionals and landowners.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman.
Any more further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Gold.
Turn your light back.
That's all right.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you,
Brian,
Mr.
you get a
Chair.
gold star.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Brian Gould. I'm a lawyer here in Concord, and I'm here today representing Coos County. I've sat here with a lot of interest listening to some of the descriptions of what this bill does. And I have to say that to some extent, I have the advantage of not being encumbered with a lot of knowledge about forestry. And I'm just looking at this straight as a straight legal issue. We often hear that, you know, in 1942, the state adopted a constitutional amendment that adopted the timber tax. But the framers of that constitutional amendment had more foresight than that. It doesn't just say that the state can impose a timber tax. The actual language is, for the purpose of encouraging conservation of the forest resources of the state, the general court may provide for special assessments, rates, and taxes on growing wood and timber. You don't see in there that anything about it being limited to a yield tax, to a timber tax as it's currently enacted. The legislature has much broader authority than that. And how do we know that? Because in RSA 79.5, which has gotten a lot of discussion today, there is a provision that says if the landowner does what Mr. Stock just said and says, well, I don't want to cut my stand of white pine right now. I want it to grow bigger. There is authority by statute for the town to say, okay, well, if you make that decision, that's fine, but we're going to tax you as that timber would have been taxed before the constitutional amendment was adopted. And any amount that you pay us for that will be a credit against the timber when you do eventually take it. That has been in the law for a long time. I have to say I'm kind of mystified by some of DRA's testimony about this, because I don't understand why DRA thinks that this is unenforceable. What we're basically saying is we go back, if you decide that you're not going to cut the timber, we go back to the way taxation was accomplished before the adoption of the timber tax. It's taxed under the property tax. Now, the suggestion that there is judgment involved and the argument that it's difficult to value, I have done some significant property tax litigation. And I will say that it's well recognized that you can determine the value of property based upon the income of that property. Because for certain properties, the value of that property is tied up with the amount of income that you receive. A good example is a parking garage. In determining what that would sell for, any buyer is going to take into account the income stream. And so New Hampshire law explicitly allows, and if you look at DRA's website, it's there, New Hampshire law explicitly allows the consideration of the income stream from certain uses on the property in determining valuation. That's what this bill would do. I'm not talking about the amendment at this point. I'm talking about 123. What this bill would do is enable the local officials to determine the value based on the income stream, less any expenses incurred by the landowner that are unrelated to the value of the property. It goes well beyond where we should today to get into more detail than that, but I just want to make sure that the committee understands that this is not an outlier at all. This is not new. This is something that has been in effect since before the constitutional amendment was adopted in 1942. There's already a statute that says that the towns can do what this bill would do. And it is, again, a return to the tax that existed, and we have had the property tax all along. It is a return to the use of the property tax to keep the towns whole. The only other thing I would like to add is that because we are not a home rule state, the state has certain responsibilities to the state, to the municipal governments in the state. And what has happened here is that policy has gotten ahead of regulation. So the policy that the state did not anticipate that these lands would be put into carbon sequestration. So there's no mechanism in place to deal with that. The county, the municipalities in Coos County are at the mercy of the state in terms of enacting policies that will enable them to be held, to be made whole as a result of this change in the use of property. And that's what this bill does. The counties cannot, the county itself cannot simply adopt a position that will protect it from this change in policy. If the state's policy is to encourage carbon sequestration, that is going to have an effect on the revenues that counties and municipalities receive. And one way or another, the county and the other municipalities should be protected against the decision that the state has made on state policy. And by adopting the registration last year, the implicit policy of the state is to recognize carbon sequestration. That's fine, but you also have to recognize that with the recognition or the adoption of that policy in any way, it does have an effect on the income of these municipalities. And as you all know, they're all on very tight budgets. I'm happy to take any questions.
And have you looked at the amendment?
I have, yes.
So, yes, my question was, have you looked at the amendment? And you said yes.
Yes, I have.
All right. Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
You're welcome. Thank you.
William Ardinger?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you very much for this chance to testify on this bill. My name is William Ardinger. I'm a tax attorney at Rath, Young and Pignatelli in Concord. I am here on behalf of a client, Aurora Sustainable Lands. Aurora Sustainable Lands has been mentioned a couple of times in the testimony thus far. In November of 2022, Aurora acquired ownership of the Connecticut Lakes Headwater Forest at the end of 2022. And Aurora has been operating and managing that landholding since then. That very precious 146,000 acres of forest land is subject to a conservation easement that was established in 2003. And I want to state clearly for the record that Aurora is in full compliance with all the terms of that 2003 conservation easement and intends, and I'll explain why, to be a very good neighbor to the 3 towns where those precious acres are located. It's interesting, you know, I'm here in front of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. It's a tax bill. And I would say that I've been practicing tax law for over, since I was elected when I was in college at UNH from Cornish and Croydon to the State House and served on the Ways and Means Committee back 45 years ago. I've been loving tax policy. You have before you a tax bill. And what I'd like to comment on is just 4 points in response to what you've heard, and then be happy to answer questions. First, let me make clear that Aurora Sustainable Lands is a private property owner, and Aurora supports private property rights. Where I grew up with my family in Cornish, my parents had, who have passed away, had a family farm with good forest land. Senator McConkey, we did exactly the same thing you did. We are huge supporters of private property rights. And so any change that the legislature would consider that affects this landowner's private property rights or any landowner's private property rights brings Aurora to speak to this committee. There have been a lot of testimony that have, I believe, shown that this issue is complicated and there's a lot of misunderstandings. One, there's been suggestions and not suggestions that there's no harvesting going on the Connecticut Lakes Headwater Forest, 146,000 acres. That is not accurate. Since 2013, this property has been enrolled in the California Carbon Program. And since 2013, over 340,000 cord of timber have been harvested and continue to be harvested at this moment on this property. In fact, when you get into the details of the California compliance protocol that governs this particular enrollment, it mandates that you apply good silvicultural practices, including regular harvesting. In fact, if you harvest forest land and timber that ends up going into something that's permanent, like lumber or like furniture, you get additional credits issued. In other words, you can get additional credits, and Connecticut Lakes does have these sale. You harvest timber if you prove that it goes into permanent forms of carbon sequestered product, like a table, you get more carbon credits issued. Now, so I want to make clear, is there harvesting going on this property? Yes. Has it declined? Yes. In my testimony, if you look at page 7, you will see graphs of exactly the timber that has been harvested on the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters Forest land since 2003 when the easement was established, and you will see a trend line on that harvest. That trend line has steadily gone down. However, I've also presented a graph that shows trend lines of U.S. production of various forms of timber harvest, U.S. lumber, saw logs and veneer, U.S. pulpwood. The long-term trend is exactly the same. It's downward. What are the causes for that general downward trend? The causes are not enrollment in these carbon sequestration programs. Remember, this property was only enrolled in 2013, long before Aurora acquired ownership. But experts have reported as recently as 2024 in logging publications that the cause of this long-term decline are markets, demand, tariffs, and labor issues. Exactly what your testimony from Jason Stock indicated. And so I want to clarify, I think that there's a misunderstanding about the lack of harvesting as a result of these programs, and it should be examined carefully. See, people have said there's no tax on carbon sales. I'm surprised about that. There's no tax on income from carbon sales. Now, I'm a tax lawyer. Our client, Aurora Sustainable Lands, when it is in the process of registering for the carbon sequestration program, complying with it, and then selling these regulatory credits to other companies. By the way, Aurora is based in North Carolina. Aurora is not a California company, but it is a California program that Aurora is registered under. When we sell these credits, we recognize income. When we recognize income, we are subject to the business profits tax. And we file business profits tax. We file business enterprise tax. So I know that people were talking about the double taxation being that, you pay tax once when you sell the carbon credit right to a third party in a contract sale. And then again, when you cut the timber, that is a form of double taxation. It would be nice to see a credit recognized for that. However, there's another form of double taxation which is more obvious. When you sell these carbon credits, you recognize business income. And that business income right now is subject to tax. In 1993, I helped Governor Steve Merrill when he was considering the business enterprise tax. And what we did to avoid double taxation then was allow the BET that you pay as a small business and large business to be credited to reduce the BPT. There is no way, I believe, that the state constitutionally can impose a tax on business income realized by sales of carbon credits at the same time we're reporting and paying tax on it under the BPT. The third issue that I've heard mentioned, that there was no real estate transfer tax paid in 2022 or other years where there were sales since 2003. That's not accurate. New Hampshire is one of the few states in the country that imposed tax not only on the actual transfer of the title, but up the chain when real estate holding companies transfer ownership and you pay transfer tax. Aurora, when it acquired this property indirectly through a merger, filed and paid real estate transfer tax to the state of New Hampshire and a few other states that impose an aggressive form of the real estate transfer tax like that. This is just another indication of the misunderstandings that are present here. It is absolutely clear that HB 123, as it presents to you from the House, is unadministrable. I don't need to go into why. The fiscal note that the department gave you identifies the technical flaws.
It is absolutely a tax on the value realized, the net value realized from the sales of carbon credit in the previous year. That's what we file and pay BPT on. And absolutely, the way that this bill is drafted as it passed the House cannot be administered, in my view, as a tax attorney. But you don't have to trust me on that. You can trust the Department of Revenue, who testified the same. I want to turn to a positive point. Aurora acquired the property in November of 22. When I was a legislator, a kid in Cornish, I saw the way the select board worked with members of the community to deal with property tax burdens, current use burdens, and other things. It was flexible. It was small town. Aurora has approached each of the 3 towns where this property is located and has said, we understand that you need stability in your budgeting. The number one thing small towns need is to know what their revenue stream is so that they can get the fire truck. They can get the service that they need. Aurora has made a commitment on a voluntary basis to make a stabilization contribution to each of these 3 towns so that if timber tax revenues for any reason falls below the 5-year preceding average, they will make an additional payment that will bring it up to that 5-year average. Aurora did that on its own and, in fact, has been received very favorably by the select boards of those towns. I understand that there's some sense in some other officials that perhaps this was disingenuous. Let me tell you, in our experience, the select board members don't feel it was disingenuous. And I wanted to commit to you that Aurora comes to the table as a good neighbor to the 3 towns and to the state of New Hampshire with this precious forest. Finally, I'll conclude that this is a mess of an issue. I've seen tax policy race ahead of knowledge before. A classic case was the LLC tax in 2008, 2009, which got repealed 6 months later. I think that the right answer, and Senator Pearl, I understand, I want to say, we are all working on these issues. At the same time, we're dealing with family concerns, and my best to you and your family as you go through this. We appreciate the work you're doing to try and bring this amendment forward. Aurora would support a study commission. Why? Because right now, the tax ideas that are circulating are half-baked. In the House, there was no hearing before a committee on the proposal. There was an executive session. But the first true debate on the provisions in the bill before you was on the House floor, where the bill passed 197 to 156, with 32% of Republicans voting on the floor in favor and 83% of the Democrats voting in favor. That was the first real debate. A study commission is absolutely required here. And I would strongly support it. I know that we're saying things like Executive Director Brady says doesn't know the implications of these issues. Councilor Kenny, something to look at here. You know, it is ripe for a study commission, and it should have a diverse membership with experts who have an experience with forestry, with these carbon programs, and with tax policy, like your Department of Revenue. I would conclude saying that we appreciate the chance to come and testify. This is a very important issue. The merits of whether carbon sequestration programs are good or bad are not really our issue as Aurora. But what is our issue when we're private property owners is that we hope to be able to manage the property so it supports recreation and tourism, which we do, that it supports access, which we do, that is consistent with our conservation easement obligations, which they are, and which preserves our private property rights to earn fair income streams from timber harvesting, which we are doing. We're very fearful of the market changes that are coming around the corner right now, but also take advantage of other streams of income. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Questions from the committee. Senator Waters.
Mark, did you have one?
Oh, I didn't.
No, I don't.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. to your last point about uncertainty, we heard this from Jason Stock too, and it's awfully hard to speculate and calculate what may be permanent changes in tariffs or in trade
Yes,
or
sir.
not, or, for a certain amount of time. But do you have any sense of, you or others in the industry, about whether you are calculating perhaps withholding harvesting because of the uncertainty of the market?
I do not have that sense. From Aurora's perspective, they work closely with a leading forestry company in New England, which is Landvest. And I did have a meeting with Landvest, and they feel that the uncertainty about what the U.S. tariffs will be, what the responsive tariff will be from, it turns out Aurora harvests a lot of lumber and ships it for treatment to a mill located in Canada.
Yeah.
And I think that the uncertainty, I think, is a grave threat to the North Country, and let me say, the North Country suffered terribly. When I was a kid at Stevens High School, we played baseball underneath those mills. Those mills have closed, I played basketball, and they've closed. We feel the pain in the North Country. I've represented their 4 hospitals as they try and come together.
So to my question, if I may, that you sense that it's possible that harvesting will be reduced
Yes.
because of the uncertainty. Okay, thank you.
But we don't know for sure.
Thank you.
Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for taking my question. It's a tax question. It's not a tree question. So you made the point that the Constitution says you can't tax the same income twice without a credit. But as I think about our 4 for-profit hospitals, the same income is taxed twice by 2 different taxes. The HCA company pays both the business profits tax and the Medicaid enhancement
Yes.
tax, and there's no credit there. So why is that constitutional? How is that different from what's being proposed here?
Oh, Senator Rosenwald, a brilliant question. It brings me back to what I was reading this morning in the Wall Street Journal was about the disproportionate share Medicaid tax. And then,
It's in the Times,
then,
too.
the Times
Yeah.
it was. Senator Gregg, Governor Gregg was promptly fished. That is a very complex question, but in litigation, the question of double taxation may come up. As you may know, Senator Rosenwald, and I know that you do, for hospitals, there has not been effective double taxation because there have been reimbursements and offsets. If those offsets were to disappear, I don't know that the constitutional question that you've identified wouldn't be carefully examined by hospitals like HCA.
So would that mean that in order to implement this bill, there would have to be a credit against the timber tax, which would reduce the revenues going to the local municipalities in order to make it constitutional?
Senator Rosenwald, thank you for the question. I believe the most clear, the way HB 123 is drafted that came out of the House, the most clear double taxation, HB 123 says, look at the sales of credits in the previous year. Look at the values of those credits. The best indication of value is what they sold for. That exact value is in the business profits tax calculation. So while you said a credit against timber tax, this is not the timber tax. This is a completely different tax. The timber tax is on stumpage value. That is like a valuation type of methodology. This is a tax on sales of a regulatory credit. And that's already in the business profits tax basis, gross business profits. That's the double tax that I think needs to be addressed.
One more follow-up, if I could. Thank you. So, switching to trees. I read this as the timber tax is assessed on trees that are lying down because they've been cut. But this carbon offset tax is on the same tree that's still standing up.
Yes.
But where am I wrong?
I would say that I heard my friend, Attorney Gould, talk about the constitutional language that supports the timber tax. Where I would nudge back on what you just said, Senator, is that the timber tax is in fact on severed, cut timber, right? And it's valued at its stumpage value. This tax in 123 is not on standing timber. It's on the sale of carbon offset credits. The way the 79.5 is drafted, and people have talked about this, it had built in its own remedy for forest owners who didn't cut timber at all, right? You can go in, the town could go in and say, you know, we don't think you're cutting timber enough, we're going to assess general property tax. 79.5 didn't work, and DRA has testified to. Could it be remedied? I don't know. I'm very worried about one thing with 79.5. While the timber tax was enacted in 1949, the current use system came in place in 1973. My Cornish and Croydon family property, my brother owns it now, is still enrolled in the current use program. If 79.5 were construed in a way that it bounces it out of current use, I think this is a much bigger kettle of fish, because current use is one of the most precious programs to preserving land for private property owners in the state. And hopefully, I haven't had a chance to review the amendment, Senator Pearl or Senator Abard carefully, but there is language that I just quickly looked at that says, notwithstanding RSA 79A, which is the current use statute. I'm very nervous about what that might mean, but I don't know what it means because I haven't had a chance. Thank you.
We're going to have a question, Senator, and then we're going to go into recess because we have at least another hour and we're going to be losing committee members. So after your question, Senator, we're going to recess this hearing.
Thank you. Did you say 1.5 questions, Mr. Chair? You said 1.5 questions or just one?
1.5 questions.
All right. Thank you.
Take your time.
All right. Thank you, sir, for being here. You spoke of being a good neighbor, Aurora and the towns, and I hear the concerns of Coos County, the commissioners. So you had spoke of a voluntary agreement that you have to help stabilize this loss of potential revenue or to help the towns maintain services the way they are. How long ago did you folks come up with that voluntary agreement?
It applied, one payment has been made with respect to the year just completed, previous to that. So the year April 1st, 2024, that the payment was made. The company has committed publicly to do the same with respect to the subsequent year. And that year is getting calculated and noticed right now in early May is when that happens. So the company is fully committed to that. It's not an agreement, sir. It is because there's no payment in lieu of taxes kind of thing. It's a commitment for stabilization contribution. The company is also committed to continue that commitment during a period where this legislature saw fit to study these important policy questions. And so that's the company has done that publicly in the North Country and in discussions with the select board. So
if I
one
could-
payment so far.
Yeah, one payment. So you've offered this agreement, what, 2 years back?
Yes.
First year's been paid, and you're calculating now for the current.
Yes, this per the year of April, ending April 1, 2025. And I do not know that payment yet, sir.
Thank you. I'll forego my half a question.
All right. Any further questions? All right, seeing none, thank you. Oh, you do have one? One quick
So
one. We've still got a lot on.
Yeah. Isn't that consistent with what the state's done with the town of Hampstead, where we bought that private hospital came off the property tax rolls, and we've been making payments to the town of Hampstead to offset that tax loss.
Senator Rosenwald, I have not focused closely, but I did hear that that occurred, and that makes sense to me. As a matter of policy, a similar concern is what motivated Aurora to try and stabilize the three towns.
Thank you.
Further questions? No. All right, seeing none. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
All right, folks, we're not going to recess. We're going to try and get through this as much as we can. There's many of us that have to leave as we get toward the 11:30 and 12 o'clock hour because we have a lengthy afternoon as well. So we're going to do as many as we can. I'll just ask everybody to try and summarize your thoughts as quickly as you can. And if we need further time, when we hit the end of what we can do today, we will have to recess until next week. So if there's a 12 or 13 of you left on the sheet to speak. So if we can move through as quickly as possible, the committee would appreciate it. With that, we will call Matt Leahy. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. For the record, I'm Matt Leahy. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Society for the Protection of New Hampshire Forest. I am passing out written testimony. I'm not going to read it, but I will just say quickly, the Forest Society certainly understands and recognizes the concerns that local municipalities, county governments have expressed today and in other venues about the financial impacts that they have experienced as a result of these forest carbon deals. So we do agree that the legislature should look at some way to help them. And just to echo Jason Stock's comments, we would support a study commission that would really look at it, to do a deep dive into possible other solutions. I guess the question before the committee is the bill as before you the right approach. And I can't, just based on the analysis that DRA did, it kind of illustrates how complicated this issue is and the bill issue. So again, we would definitely urge a study commission.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Brody. Is Brody in, or did he go out? He may have gone up. All right, we'll skip over Brody. Sorry, what was your name? You're Bob?
Bob,
Yeah, you were gonna be my next call. Come on up.
I think someone said. Thank you, committee members. My name's Bob Birdie. I'm a licensed professional forester. I'm also a licensed surveyor. I've been a selectman in the town of Rumney for 31 years, and I've been involved in a professional occupation for 60 years. I have managed timberland from West Stewartstown down to Winchester and over to Kingston. And in the course of my 60 years, I have marked and managed timberland in every town in Grafton County and in every county in the state. So I have a pretty fair knowledge of what it means to grow timber and the cost and the analysis and the benefits and sometimes not the benefits of owning timberland. Today I am not as active in the forest as I used to be because of advancing arthritis, but my mind is still pretty good. And so I think I have some benefit of looking at trees and seeing how they're grown and managed for a long period of time. And I also have the benefit of having been a selectman for a number of years and the potential issues that arise daily with doing that. I'm representing today Green Acre Woodlands and myself, and to a lesser extent probably the municipalities in the state. Green Acre Woodlands is a landowner that has owned land since 1946 in New Hampshire. They currently own in excess of 17,000 acres. Their lands, all their land is open to hunting, fishing, hiking, cross-country skiing, snowmobiling. Approximately 8,000 acres is now under easement. And they have paid yield taxes in the various towns that they own land in since 1980. From 2014 to 2023, they've paid $191,000 in yield taxes to various towns in the state. During the same period of time, our removals have exceeded our growth by about 1,990 tons. We have been cutting some mature forest and forests that have been done under management for many, many years. However, starting in 2024, our management plans have called for the reduction in timber that we're going to harvest. So we've done an extensive review of all of our lands, and based on the growth analysis, the ages, and so forth, we are going to be cutting 2,000 cords less than we're growing every year. Currently, in New Hampshire, there are 15 commercial trees that grow. They all require different types of levels of management. In the cycle of a tree, commercial or the financial return is maximum, or its maturity, we call financial maturity, occurs somewhere between 60 and 100 years in the tree, depending on the species and what the quality of wood that you're trying to grow. So growing a forest takes a very long time. And during these intervals while a tree is growing, you're looking to find ways to augment your income to own land. One of these, what has come about recently is a program that we've heard so much about, carbon credits. We did not enter this program, we did a lot of research on it. And quite frankly, we had the benefit of knowledge from an individual, Charles Levesque and his company, that encouraged us to go into the carbon credit program. So over 4 years ago, we entered the program, and to date, we have spent well over six figures, well into six figures, internally and externally. And as to date, we have not received any income. In reviewing this bill, let's separate what's happening. It's basically two issues. One, what has happened up in northern Coos County and the rest of the state of New Hampshire. So I'm representing the area south of the northern part of the state. And there's only a couple other people who are in this program. One of the others is with us today, and he will comment. We have very similar forest. I mean, just the way it works out. And he can speak for himself. But there are really only, between the two of us, we have 28,000 acres. I think enrolled in the programs now are about 35,000. So it's not a huge impact right now to the state of New Hampshire. It may be. I don't recommend anybody getting into the carbon program. It's been a very long, and we don't know if we're going to benefit from it or not. We're not from California. The people who are represented here today are landowners that live or have corporations in this state. So we talk about the California, it has nothing to do with the California project, the rest of it. What's happening up north, yes. I want to talk briefly about the forest industry. 3 mills have closed in the last 6 months in New Hampshire. It has nothing to do with carbon credits. It has to do with labor and availability of a natural resource. Carbon credits has not impacted the forest industry in New Hampshire. There are external factors, including tariffs, but really what has happened up to date has nothing even to do with tariffs. And it has nothing to do with carbon credits. In southern New England today, there is one sawmill in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. In Vermont today, there are only 3. This has nothing to do with carbon credits. The industry is suffering from a lot of issues, including the lack of an adequate workforce. Yield taxes. The town of Rumney gets $20,000 or less a year over the last 5 years. It's 0.3% of our revenue. We raise $4.2 million. Our revenue is 20. Carbon credits is not affecting us. What is affecting us is the U.S. Forest Service, who for 12 years has not, and they own 48% of the commercial forest land in the town, and they've not cut a tree. They have not cut any trees. So the impact of yield taxes is not that great to our town for a source of income. And quite frankly, I don't think anyone here knows how much money the state of New Hampshire relies on for the towns. It's roughly $4 million total. So when people start saying the towns aren't going to have money for sand or plowing or education, that's a misnomer. That's not true. $20,000 for the town of Rumney is less than it's about 0.3%. So I really think there's a lot of issues in front of us. I think that there's a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of misrepresentation of the facts, and I strongly urge this committee to take a long, hard look at the total picture and look what's wrong with educating ourselves with what carbon credits is about. It is an income tax. You can't, if it isn't an income tax, it can't be a yield tax because Green Acre Woodlands is going to be cutting trees every year. So when and a tree that's under, say, 10 inches in diameter, it has no commercial value, but you're taxing it under the carbon credit tax. So I strongly urge this committee to educate itself and educate the state of New Hampshire on what is going on. And I thank you for your time and listening to me.
Well, thank you for your testimony. Senator Waters on the question.
I just got to tell you, my hearing's a little bit off, which is good sometimes. I don't have to listen to my wife, so.
Mine too, by the way,
Okay.
so we'll be a good pair here.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Do you pay BPT on the carbon tax credit?
What's that?
Do you pay BPT on the carbon credit income you get?
Have we paid any? Yes. Will you? No, I mean, we haven't received $1 yet.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
No, we haven't received it. And as a selectman, I'm not worried about the yield tax. I'm worried about the amount of money the towns are going to be reduced in income with the recent policies that the state has issued on income, and we're going to have a shortfall. I wish it was only $20,000 this year.
All right, further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Well, we're going to try and go every other one here. How about Steve Halley from Mylan Lumber? Okay. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thanks for your time. Basically, I'm going to talk, I'm boots on the ground. So we own 5 sawmills, all of them which border the upper Connecticut Valley. In November of 2022, when Aurora did purchase that land, we saw a significant reduction in fiber, which caused us to, that first year, curtail 6 weeks worth of production, put our staff back to 40 hours a week, and we just went back to 4.5 days of 45 hours a week this past November 2024. A lot of the wood that came off that land goes to our Canadian sawmills. We have 4 Canadian sawmills that directly border that land, and then us in Mylan, all of which the lumber comes down to Mylan in tune of 130 million board feet a year of finished lumber. So we buy $55 to $60 million worth of saw logs a year between the mills, which has a huge ripple effect in the local economies through, you know, loggers and truckers and convenience stores and everything else, which I don't think selling carbon credits has that kind of ripple effect. In our eyes, the tariffs are not, we live it. Some things people talk tariffs and whatnot. What some people don't talk about is the cheap electricity, the exchange rates and everything else that almost levels the playing field according to our owner. We're just looking for carbon credits to be treated like all forest products. So we know what a ton of wood costs. We know what hardwood saw logs cost. We know what softwood saw logs cost. And what we've had troubles with is really don't know what a carbon credit costs. So how can you compete against something an unknown? So hence, in the past 2 years with the reduction of fiber from that land, we have bought a lot more logs out in the Bangor area in Watertown, New York, in which the first 2 rail cars of logs are coming in from Watertown, New York to St. Johnsbury, Vermont this week, and then eventually we'll go into Whitefield, New Hampshire. So we had to reach out and buy an additional 15 to 20 million board feet of saw logs from 2 other states that we used to get from New Hampshire. And that's all. Just whatever the financials are, if it could be treated like all the other forest products, so we have a level playing field, that's all we ask.
Well, thank you for your
That's it.
testimony. Do you have any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Coombs.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Coombs. I'm owner of Chicora Forest Lands and Ospey Mountain Land Company in Tamworth, New Hampshire. Chicora Forest Lands has been in business since 1978, and we have 12,000 acres of forest land in Ospey Mountains in New Hampshire. And Ospey Mountain Land Company processes and packages firewood and packages it, ships it to all northeastern grocery chains down into the mid-Atlantic. And we produce about 10,000 cords of firewood a year in packages and ship it out. And we depend on our land for that resource. For about 28% of our log procurement comes from our own land. We harvest every year, the same amount according to our management plans. And we will continue to do that. And we continue to pay the timber taxes to the 5 towns that the land is located in as a result of that. I also have a maple syrup operation to help produce income from the land, to keep the land productive. And back in 2010, I went to a conference on carbon credits. At the time, it was the California compliance market. I didn't think it was a good fit for our company, and we didn't do it. About 2019, Charlie Levesque's firm brought to my attention this. He was working as a contractor to procure lands for this developer. And I met with him, worked it out. It was a different program. It's not the California program that we've heard so much about today. It's a voluntary program. And so I went through the process, and 5 years ago, I signed a contract with him. And it's an expensive process to get into. We have about $250,000 into the program so far between inventories and verifications. And this year, for the first time, we did receive some income. Most of it was taken up by paying back the cost of the inventories and the verifications, but we did receive some income. And we hope to receive more. So those credits that we received were from 2021. And in 2021, we harvested the growth on our land, we paid a timber tax. So if we get taxed on the carbon from the same year, we're going to be paying it twice. And sooner or later, the trees will be cut. All the trees are measured. I don't know if everybody knows how this works. All the trees are measured, and they determine the number of tons of carbon on the property. So the standing timber has to remain in place that was in place the day they did the inventory. You can you get paid for that over time, hopefully. And then going forward, you can either harvest your growth or you can sell it back to them as carbon credits. And we will continue to harvest our timber going forward. Before I did sign up for it, I went to the state of New Hampshire because we have about half of our land
just under 6,000 acres. We have a forest legacy easement on. So I went to the state of New Hampshire to see if it was okay to do that, and I got their blessing to go ahead and do it. They said that it was not in any kind of confrontation with the terms of the easement. And I have submitted my management plans to the state on this property. So we got the easement in 2001, put a management plan in 2001, 2011, we put another one in, and the state forester has to approve it. We just got the 2020, I think it was 22 that we were approved. Our plans haven't changed any. We're planning on harvesting at the same levels, but if we're also taxed on the carbon as a yield tax or severance tax, we're going to pay double on that. And then as income into the business, we'll be paying on either the business profits tax or the business enterprise tax. So it is more than double taxation. And I keep hearing this, pay their fair share. In my case, I am paying what I was always paying. This is just an additional program to help generate income, keep the property in open space, and that's good for the state. And I think that, you know, this is a subject that needs a lot more study to determine the different types of programs there are, the different types of credits there are, and the different situations and localities in the state where ownerships vary so much. Before, I think a study commission is definitely a way to go in this, to understand this before we go down the wrong path, and it starts to hurt businesses like mine. Mine's a family business. I grew up on a farm in New Hampshire. I've made my living in agriculture all my life. And agricultural business are not easy. You have to do everything you can do, and this is just one more thing that helps a small business to try to make it make sense.
Thank you, Jeff. Any questions from the committee? Senator McConkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Coons. Nice to see you. We've had conversations on the phone before. And I came in late, so I apologize. I hear that you're in favor of a possible amendment which would turn this to a commission. Are you also in favor of House Bill 123, or were you in favor of House Bill 123 as it was brought forward?
I'm opposed to the bill.
Okay, opposed, but you are in favor of?
I think it needs some studying. I think there are some things that need to be looked at to make sure that towns are kept whole and things are fair throughout the state.
Thank you for that. You are speaking, you're in my district, in my backyard of my businesses, and your property is especially valuable to the recreational community and snowmobile connectivity, which will get us up to Castle in the Clouds, which for anybody that's a regular snowmobiler, not myself, will say how wonderful and beautiful that connection is. And I know there was some conversation between yourself and I on whether where this bill went, that you might reconsider motorized vehicles on your property. Am I to assume that if this were to move forward in the amended form, that would not be an issue? Or you can talk to me offline about it, sir.
I don't understand what the amended form is. I thought that the amended form was studying this bill.
Yeah.
And I think in the memorandum of understanding that Jason Stock put forward, that would be part of it, that all the trails would remain open, the public access would remain the same as it is right now.
Motorized also?
Everything.
That is.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Further questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Charlie Lurick. Good morning, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the committee. Charlie Levesque. I live in the town of Antrim. I'm a licensed forester, have been a forester for going on 46 years. I have a natural resource consulting firm, Innovative Natural Resource Solutions. We have offices in New Hampshire and Maine, and we work all over North America. I have other hats as well. Up until last year, was the director of a 7-state effort called Securing Northeast Forest Carbon Program.
And so as a result of that, I am considered at least somewhat of an expert on forest carbon offsets, the credits you've been talking about at this hearing. Be happy to answer any questions about any of that. I'm also a member of the Connecticut Lakes Headwaters Citizens Committee. And I got involved with HB 123, which I support, by the way, as a result of my involvement with the Citizens Committee and the sponsors who brought this bill forth today. I have been trying to help them in an effort to recoup the lost revenues of the North Country towns that have been affected by carbon offset credit sales. This is a statewide issue, but that's how I get involved with it, and that's how you have House Bill 123 before you. I think you know there is another amendment. I thought it was going to be introduced, but it hasn't been introduced, that fixes the issues that DRA had on the House passed version. I've seen it, at least in a draft form. I'd encourage you to look at that and not move forward with a study commission, and instead to hold another hearing on that amendment, because it is an amendment that fixes the bill in a way that DRA can implement it, and it does what the original sponsors had in mind for this. I just have a few more points, but one of the key points that's been talked about several times, which is incorrect, and that is that this would be an income or a sales tax. It's definitely not a new tax, and it's not a double tax. It's not an income or sales tax. It'd be operating just like the timber tax operates. And some of you may not know that the way the timber tax operates, because it really is in lieu of the property tax, is the landowner, when the landowner sells timber, they are not charged the 10% tax based on the income they receive. That's not how it works. DRA develops an average range of timber values, and they do that and issue a report every quarter, and that goes to the assessing officials at the local level, and so they assess the timber tax based on an average range that's provided by DRA. That's in there specifically because this is in lieu of the property tax. It's not an income tax, and it's not a sales tax. This version of HB 123 that has been amended to address the concerns of DRA fully takes that into account, because it also is not an income or a sales tax, because under this amendment, the DRA would be researching the values of carbon offset credits and be giving the local assessing officials a range of values from which they can assess the carbon offset credit sales that happened in the previous year. So again, I think this is fixed. It's in that amendment. It is very different. I'd encourage you to have another hearing on it, but I think that's the way you should go and not do the study commission. I have two quick stories to finish off. Number one, one of the owners of land that is on the New Hampshire registry, that 186,000 acres, asked me why I was working in support of House Bill 123. Because he said, finally, this is a quote, finally, I have found a way to not have to pay timber tax. It's a great loophole. This is what he told me. So understand that this is, in fact, the current situation, a loophole, and HB 123 attempts to repair that. Lastly, I spoke to a sawmill owner who is not here today. I encouraged him to come. He said he probably could not make it yesterday, and he told me that he doesn't support carbon offset credit sales, and he supports some way of evening the playing field so that the current situation, which provides an incentive for landowners to sell carbon and not timber, so that is fixed. And he said if HB 123 does that, he said, I can support that. But he said, I haven't looked at it, so I don't know the details, but just understand that the wood using industry, and you heard one of those individuals prior to my speaking, supports this kind of thing to even the playing field so that landowners aren't given an incentive not to cut timber. I will end it there. I know it's been a long hearing, but I thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to help you in any way I can, as again, with my expertise in forest carbon offsets.
Well, thanks for your testimony. Senator Waters with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you. Before I ask the question, I just want to note that we really can't record hearsay about another person who had testified. So if there's a document, that's can be, so we can't just really can't have hearsay about what somebody else may have said.
Understood.
Out of the hearing. But I do have a couple of direct questions for you. We've heard from a number of folks about the problems with 79:5 and just not being workable. Would you agree with that?
It is not workable in its current form. That's why House Bill 123 was introduced, to try to address the situation. And I'd encourage you to support 123 in the amended form. Again, I hope you take that up when you get into executive session and at least look at this other amendment that fixes all the problems DRA had with the bill as came out of the House.
And this is just a kind of a speculation I happen to think of while we're having a hearing. Those folks who may pay the BPT on income derived from the carbon credits, that in a sense that is a tax that's being leveled on that, the income derived from that. Would it make any sense to try to amend the BPT language to say that such income derived from this source would return to the municipalities in lieu of their being able to tax those carbon credits?
If you obviously, thank you for the question. If you go down that path, you would also need to do it for timber, because remember, timber tax, which this would come under, is in lieu of the property tax. And currently, if you sell timber, you pay the 10% yield tax, but you also pay the BBT or BET as the case may be. This is no different from that. So if you're going to change it for carbon offset credit sales, you'd need to change it for timber as well to be fair, because it's under the same statute.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me. Thank you for coming in. Excuse me. Thanks for your testimony. We appreciate it. Brody, I called you earlier. You're back. You want to come up?
Yeah, please. Thank you. Sorry. We've got some zoning mandates in the other chamber. I have some handouts for you folks I'd like to go over with you, but I'll try to be brief with my testimony. My name is Brody DeShays. I represent the New Hampshire Municipal Association. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit that represents the 234 municipalities in the state of New Hampshire. First, I just want to really highlight towns will lose revenues if all yields from timber aren't considered equally. Municipalities, they get anywhere from about 1% up to 10 to 15% of their revenues through timber tax. Many of the unorganized towns or the townships that are up north that are in Coos County, sometimes they can get 30 to 50% of their revenues that helps offset the county's ability to administrate to them, and they are members of the municipal association through Coos County. I want to also flag there are two taxable events that this bill would establish under timber tax, but one for the yield. So we're yielding from timber, and there's two different taxable events and one singular tax that's being modified. There's the cut and the stumpage value. So when there's a cut, there's a taxable event. And in the case under House Bill 123, there's the issuance and sale of a carbon credit on the private market. Now, both are a yield from the same timber. And as we've seen the entire market, continue to grow for carbon offsetting and things of that nature, we have seen a decrease in revenue for our municipalities. And we believe that these carbon credits should be treated as if it's like any kind of regular wood or timber because you're yielding value from it. I also want to flag, we've had a lot of discussion about RSA 79:5. We've spoken with DRA, we've spoken with our members. We've had in the last 25 years, one member consider utilizing the statute, and they were essentially told by their legal counsel and by us that it was probably not the most productive, that it was not advisable for municipalities to utilize RSA 79:5. And let me really explain as to why. RSA 79:5 was written when property taxation was done extremely differently, right? In the language that you guys have seen today, it mentions general property tax. New Hampshire has not done general property tax since the 1960s. We tax real estate. So the idea that that you would be able to have the value of the general property tax of a bunch of standing timber, assessors currently aren't trained to do that. It's unworkable. We've heard from the Assessors Association they would not be able to do it. And again, our taxation scheme for property in the state of New Hampshire is completely different now. We also don't know how municipalities would keep track of that credit. On their rolls, and there could be very long periods of time and even multiple landowners where that credit would have to carry over. We're not sure how that would be tracked. through like maybe deeds and things of that nature if it would just be on the municipality to track it. So we actually, in the House side, in our testimony, and I'll provide again today, if House Bill 123, as it's currently, you know, whether it's the amendment that they've worked on with DRA or Representative Davis's current language, we would welcome a repeal of 79:5 to prevent any concerns of double taxation. And again, we also want to point out with double taxation, again, there's two different events that would fall under timber tax for 123 at a singular moment. And so a repeal of 79:5, which is an unused and unworkable statute to prevent any concerns, would prevent any concern that, you know, if people put their timber and carbon credits that are, you know, into carbon sequestration, that 79:5 would come under, you know, effect, that a municipality or an assessor would go out and assess under general property taxation. We don't think municipalities would attempt to do that. And we also don't want municipalities to necessarily try to do that because it could lead to potential costly litigation for them. I did hand out to you too a bit of history from research that I did going through some of the legislative journals back in the 1950s, describing the Declaration of Policy in 1949 for RSA 79 and some notes in the 1950s regarding the timber tax. And it's not unregular for the state to, you know, have modified how timber is taxed in the state as it continues to support markets or private or public initiatives that increase conservation. RSA 79 was originally established as a way to prevent clear cutting and improve conservation. At that time, the state defined, quote, heavily timbered towns and had a calculation formula for how the state would make those municipalities whole. When the timber tax came into effect, there were a lot of municipalities that lost revenue. It's very similar to the situation we ran into now. And so what the state did is it had a calculation for who are these municipalities that are most disproportionately affected by the implementation of RSA 79, and they had a fund, and they would disperse from that fund. I imagine with the current fiscal estimates and revenue estimates that the state is getting in the current budget process, I doubt you guys will be establishing a multi-million-dollar fund to make municipalities whole as carbon sequestration grows. So rather than kind of copy the solution that they had in the 1950s for the state providing just general funds to these heavily timbered municipalities that are disproportionately affected by new kind of schemes to increase conservation, we think it makes the most sense to just tax these carbon credits as if you would the wood yielded and to treat the yields equally. And there's been a lot of compelling testimony today as to why that should be the case, how it levels the playing field, how it's a benefit for rural municipalities that disproportionately are heavily timbered and that have industries that really are built off of the timber industry in the state. And with that, I will take any questions if the committee has any.
Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? Looks like
Great,
you're good.
thank you.
Thank you. Scott Reinier?
Thank you, committee members. I do have some written testimony, and I'll just try to briefly summarize.
That would be
What?
much appreciated.
Was all right. So I'm a resident of Errol, New Hampshire. I'm a licensed forester, been a licensed forester here in the state for over 25 years. And I am the regional manager for Wagner Forest Management in the northern part of the state, one of the larger land managers in the state. I strongly oppose House Bill 123 as written. I have not seen the amendment that was proposed today, but I do feel that it is an income tax. And in my testimony, I gave some examples of revenue streams that landowners use in New Hampshire currently. Some of those examples are maple sugaring, recreational camp leases, Christmas tree plantations, cellular tower leases, renewable energy project leases, conservation easements. These are all examples of revenue streams that, as proposed, are not taxed in the same way as proposed in House Bill 123. I also serve as a selectman in the town of Errol for the last 7 years, and it kind of gives me a unique perspective here as far as how I see this particular bill being very unclear and how it puts a burden on the assessing services that towns, municipalities rely on. Right now in Coos County, especially the northern half of the state,
most municipalities are struggling to retain assessing services. And I think this added burden of a relative unknown such as carbon agreements is likely to spark like a chain reaction that frankly the DRA is not prepared for in assisting the municipalities. So I support the idea of doing a 2-year study commission and really not blocking landowners from entering these private legal contracts so that DRA and the affected parties can come to terms on a tax proposal that makes sense for all. So, thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Yeah.
Any questions? Senator Rosenwald.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for taking my question.
Yes.
Did you just say you support both the moratorium and not preventing landowners
I do not
from
support the moratorium.
Okay.
I support
private
2-year
property rights?
private property rights and a 2-year study commission.
Thank you.
Further questions? All right, seeing none.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have the written testimony here.
Please stand right to
Thank you.
Max here. Dan Hudnut. Folks, we got about 3 of you left, and if we hustle, we got to get out of here by noon. So we'll try and get you all in today.
Thank you. My name is Dan Hudnut. I am a resident of Lyme, New Hampshire, and I'm the president of Wagner Forest Management that Scott works for me. Wagner is one of the larger land managers, owners in the state. I can say without question that we pay more yield tax than anybody in the state, and that we are, especially in the unorganized towns up north, that we are a major contributor to the budgets up there. And that we actually would like to cut more wood up there, and we're dealing with a loss of markets and limited contractor capacity. We had the mill over in Jay, Maine, that blew up in April of 2020, removed 1 million tons worth of demand from our markets. That's been the big thing that we've been dealing with. So I think that there are a lot of things going on that affect our markets, both within our control, but then a lot of them outside of our control. And I think that, just to put it in context, I think, first of all, I also want to say I'm really pleased to hear about all the support for the forest products community, the industry, and the harvesting of wood in the North Country. That's really nice to hear through the testimony today and through your questions. I think, again, this HB 123, as passed, is a bill that was developed in response to one particular project on one particular property with a limited understanding of what's going on in the broader marketplace for carbon offset credits. The California registry credits are no longer available to improve forest management projects outside of California. So it's not an option for any landowner in New Hampshire to enter into one of those projects at this point. The voluntary market that you heard described by the 2 other landowners, those are available, and those are something where it's not a California influenced thing. There are standards developed, and they're entering into standard contractual commitments to follow those. I think we've heard a lot about the constitutional amendment, and we heard some partial quotes, but I also wanted to just hit the full quote again. The 1942 amendment. For the purpose of encouraging the conservation of the forest resources of the state, the general court may provide for special assessments, rates, and taxes on growing wood and timber. I think everybody's focused on the second part of that they want to tax something here, but nobody's focused on the first part of that, which specifies when the general court can do this, and it's for the conservation of forest resources. And I don't understand how House Bill 123 encourages conservation of forest resources. It's not to say that I necessarily, I wouldn't like to see more equitable taxation, but I'm not sure how you do it with that proviso in the Constitution. I think, reiterating some of the other points, I think everybody understands frustrations of a town like Pittsburgh that's seen its revenue diminished or has concerns about the future diminishment of their revenues. I think the MOU that we discussed, that Jason Stock has presented on behalf of the NHTOA members, does an effective job, a responsible job of saying that we will, go forward under these under these conditions, and that we will be in communication with the municipalities that will be affected if anybody goes into a project and intends to harvest less. I think as we heard, two of the landowners in here are planning to harvest the same amount as they ever would have harvested, and now we're going to tax them on that. I think the other thing to mention, Scott touched on the maple syrup thing. There's no tax on revenue for maple syrup. And so if you now, as a Maple Grove owner, you could enter into a carbon agreement whereby you're agreeing not to harvest those trees and getting paid by someone who voluntarily is paying you for that. But now the state of New Hampshire is going to say, we're not going to tax you for producing maple syrup, but we're going to tax you for producing carbon. And I'm not sure what the basis for that would be. I think I'll wrap up there and take any questions you have. I also have written comments here.
All right, well, thank you. Questions from the committee? Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thomas Hahn.
My name is Thomas Hahn, and I've been a consulting forester in New Hampshire since 1985. Our firm manages approximately 50,000 acres of private, corporate, and municipal forest land. And we have several clients who are currently working on carbon offset projects, and several other clients have inquired about it. I'm also on a committee that's been studying forest taxation in New Hampshire in detail, including the yield tax and current use assessment. I oppose House Bill 123 as passed by the House. I'm submitting some rather lengthy testimony, so I'll try to summarize as quickly as I can. One item to bring it to your attention is the definition of a timber yield tax. The National Timber Tax website provides one. And that is basically that a yield tax is applied to harvested timber. So when we're talking about carbon offset credits, it just does not meet that definition. I just want to reiterate what some of the others have said, that forest management and timber harvesting is compatible with carbon offset programs. The clients that we're working with that are going into a carbon offset program intend to harvest as much timber as possible as they previously would. So the effects on municipal yield tax revenue should be minimal. When you look at the 9 landowners that are currently on the New Hampshire Carbon Registry, I don't know all 9 of them, but when you look at that list, we're not talking about out-of-state corporations coming in and dictating our forest management. They're New Hampshire landowners. Several of them have been very long-term forest landowners and have been proponents of sustainable forest management for a long time. Another interesting item in our committee study, that the New Hampshire current use assessment model tells us that the average financial return from timber management in New Hampshire is about 1%. So just put that into perspective of a 10% tax on carbon credits and yield tax, essentially. That you can see why landowners turn to the sale of conservation easements, leasing their land for winter solar farms, or selling carbon credits to get a little better return on their investment. There's a number of different carbon programs available to landowners. Some of them are fairly short term, of only 10 or 20 years. If the average re-entry between harvests in New Hampshire is 20 to 30 years, then landowners in those programs will probably have absolutely no effect on municipal revenue from the yield tax. I think you also need to look at whether carbon credit sales are very similar to the sale of timber rights. And that type of thing is covered under the real estate transfer tax. And the real estate transfer tax is 1.5%. And very similarly, as a comparison, if carbon credit sales were subject to a local property tax, our current use tax assessment model in 2024 lists the average New Hampshire municipal tax rate as 1.56%. And just in closing, I'll just say that I am in support of a study commission. It's a very complex issue. There's a lot of things to look at, and HB 123, in my opinion, is premature.
Thank you for your testimony. Do we have any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you. All right, I still have three more. Sorry, I had missed one in there. So you got about 3 or 4 minutes each if we can wrap up, because I do have to respect the committee, and I've got to let them out of here by noon. So, Tom Christentum, did I get that right?
He left his written testimony and had to leave, so you're down to 2.
All right. Meredith Hatfield. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Meredith Hatfield for the Nature Conservancy, and I'll also try to be brief. We agree with several of the prior speakers who oppose the House-passed version of House Bill 123. The Nature Conservancy, in partnership with the American Forest Foundation, offers the Family Forest Carbon Program, which is one of the smaller programs that you've heard about. It's available to New Hampshire landowners of over 30 acres, and it is a 20-year commitment. And it is compatible with existing uses and really tries to respect the landowner's wishes for their property, including harvesting. And really one of the main pieces of our program is to help landowners who aren't currently actively managing, or as Senator McConkey said, are good stewards. So we're trying to bring resources to folks so that they can do more. I did attach to my letter a copy of the properties that are in the Forest Carbon Registry today, or actually this was as of March. This is available on the Dancer website, so I just thought it might be helpful for you to see who is in the registry today. And I did do some research on what was publicly available in terms of where the landowners reside, and I agree with a prior speaker who said, you know, most of these are long-term New Hampshire landowners, and several of them are actually nonprofits that are land trusts or organizations very focused on conservation. I have received a texted version of the amendment, Senator Pearl, and thank you very much for all of your efforts to try to bring forward a more workable version of the bill. I haven't had a chance to review it, but we do support, as we did last year, the creation of a study commission. We think a lot of questions have been raised, and it really would be useful to think about these issues more. We're very sympathetic to the challenges in the North Country, and we would actually hope that a study commission would consider some broader issues. Senator Waters, your question about redistributing revenue, I think is an interesting one. And Senator Rosenwald, at an earlier hearing on another North Country topic, you know, you also raised other ideas about rooms and meals, revenue distribution. You know, I think the North Country is the jewel of New Hampshire, right? I mean, it drives so much of our tourism, recreation. It's, you know, why people come here. And we would really support a more equitable way to ensure that North Country towns are not hurt, or the county is not hurt as, you know, new things like forest carbon emerge. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the committee? All right, seeing none. Max Dybun? Is Max here? Oh, there he is.
I'm not Max, but I'd like to give a quick statement for 1 minute, please.
All right, well, I think that finishes the list. So Max is not here?
Is it Mark?
Oh, Mark? Might be Mark. Might be Mark. All right, hold on. Mark, come on up. My apologies.
My apologies for the poor penmanship.
Senator Avard has sort of half checked you off, and I wasn't sure at first if you'd been there.
I have brought a copy of my testimony as well, so I will be brief. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. Again, my name is Mark Raybon. I'm with Weyerhaeuser. I'm currently the New England stumpage manager for the company. Prior to my current role, I managed our timberlands in New Hampshire from 2019 to 2023 as well. We are opposed to HB 123. We own about 24,000 acres around the Errol area in Collis County. Our timberlands are sustainably managed to Sustainable Forestry Initiative standards and Forest Legacy Conservation Easement standards as well. Our management contributes to New Hampshire's forests, our forest products industry, healthy wildlife habitat, clean water, and a capture of carbon storage while protecting special places and providing abundant opportunities for outdoor recreation. We manage those timberlands out of our office in Lancaster, New Hampshire. HB 123, we feel, would impose a new tax on forest landowners who sell carbon credits, essentially taxing portions of the same timber twice. We pay timber tax on the timber we cut and sell each year. This new tax would be imposed on the income from the sale of carbon credits based on the storage of carbon in the wood of a tree. Over a 40-year carbon agreement, the landowner would pay tax on the tree's growth each time credits are sold and then pay again for the same when the tree is harvested. Weyerhaeuser strongly does oppose what we feel this to be a double tax. In 2023, Weyerhaeuser registered the Kibbe Skinner Forest carbon project in Maine on about 50,000 acres. We cited this project to maximize working forest benefits. So we are harvesting timber under this arrangement. The forest remains as forest and their benefits remain unchanged long term. Kibbe Skinner will continue to provide environmental and ecological benefits, a working forest economy, and carbon storing wood products. HB 123 is based on the assumption that municipalities lose timber tax revenue when a landowner enrolls in forest carbon project. However, we believe this is a false assumption. Specifically, in the 40-year voluntary carbon market, improved forest management projects incentivize landowners to grow higher value timber, saw logs versus pulpwood, that will benefit New Hampshire sawmills and also yield higher timber tax valuation. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'll take any questions.
All right, well, thank you, Mark. I got it right now.
My problem.
All right. Any questions from the committee? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Representative, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes here, real quick.
Thank you very much. Thank you for taking my testimony. I appreciate being here. I'm Representative Mike Willett from Colebrook. I represent Colebrook, Columbia, and Stewartstown. We've had a lot of testimony today, so I'll be very very quick and to the facts. There's two facts we have to understand and is at the heart of this. First of all, standing timber is part of the real estate and therefore subject to assessment as part of the property taxes. And I'm going to read a quote of part of 79.3, RSA 79.3. A normal yield tax at the rate of 10% on the stumpage value at the time of sale, unquote. That's our law. I want to mention something. The amendment that Charlie Levesque had alluded to in his testimony, in that amendment, any properties under 500 acres are exempt from paying a carbon yield tax if they're in the program. So the small farmers, the small landowners under 500 acres are exempt. Opponents of this bill have done everything to confuse and complicate things. They say it's not workable. We spent many, many hours with DRA, and their attorney says it is workable. And we talked about numbers. By our calculations, the town of Pittsburgh alone has been shorted over $4 million in this yield tax over the last 10 years. And for a town of 800 people, not given what is due to them is reprehensible. And we heard how great the companies are doing with the towns and stuff. Call the town fathers in Pittsburgh and ask them how pleased they are and if they have a good neighbor up there. I want to say thank you, and I'm going to ask you to please see the forest through the trees.
Thank you, Representative. Any questions? Seeing none.
Thank you.
We have one quick call. Anybody else who wants to testify? All right, seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on House Bill 123. And thank you all for your patience.
2 minutes left.
We made it. All right, with that, we're going to close the Energy Committee for today. Thank you.